You're with Julian on the brown note and an extension of I do politics on the brown note and movie reviews. And one thing that I've studiously never done is album reviews. And I think the reason for that is that all of this stuff usually comes from my radio show, which is a 2 hour show. And when I feature music, like new albums, if I do a movie review, I talk for 10 minutes about the movie. But if I do an new album, it's broken because I'll play a track, talk about it for a bit, talk about it in another song, play another song, talk about it. So there's no like coherent review. But I've decided to throw the odd one in there. So there is a reason for that, and it's Black Country New Road, a British indie band from Cambridgeshire. Tyler Hyde on bass, Lewis Evans on saxophone, Georgia Ellery on violin, May Kershaw on keys, Charlie Wayne on drums, and Luke Mark on guitar. The lead singer, Isaac Woods, has left the band. Now, they came out with a debut album last year about exactly the same time, called For the First Time, and I've mentioned a lot about how we've had this rebirth of not only indie music with a lot of American bands like Parky Courts, Protomata, and all of that, where there's been this resurgence out of nowhere of guitar indie music, which was dormant from around 2005 until around 2015. But there's also been this astonishing re-emergence of British indie music, with the likes of Black Midi, Squid, Dry Cleaning, Working Men's Club, and Black Country New Road. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen this incredible resurgence of not post-Oasis, indie disco music, but very sort of angular art house, difficult, challenging, ambitious British indie guitar music, and it's been phenomenal. And now Black Country New Road have come back with their second album called Ants From Up There, as in the phrase, we must look like ants from up there. The singer, Isaac Woods, left the band 2 days before it was due to be released and cited mental health problems, saying that he'd felt really anxious and sad. A great piece of British understatement, if ever there was one. To this notion, it almost feels like a more self-help version of Joy Division. Joy Division's lead singer, Ian Curtis, famously killed himself on the verge of an American tour just before their second album, Closer, was released, and just before the single Love Will Tear Us Apart was released. This time around, Isaac has perhaps taken the wise choice, just on the verge of their American tour and of the release of their second album, in disappearing for a while, and no one knows what's going to happen, and it has cast a pall over the album and the band, and I think most people believe that he will return at some point, but we really don't know. The reason I've decided to start reviewing albums, and I don't know how frequently I'll do it, is the quality of this release. This is one of the best indie albums of the century. Now, the main, there are lots of, I've loved the albums by Black Midi and Squid last year, and Working Men's Club the year before. And the Dry Cleaning one I wasn't sold on because of the vocalist was so naff and the music was a little bit ordinary. But these are great bands. There's one crucial difference between those and Black Country New Road, and that is Isaac Woods being so emotional. Those bands are often political and knotty, math rocky, and so on. But this band, and particularly this album, really harks back to one of the landmark albums of this century and bands, Arcade Fire's Funeral from around 2004, because it is very emotionally satisfying music. It's some of the most emotive music coming out of rock in any capacity, which immediately sets it out from even the American bands. This is that kind of soaring, emotionally satisfying music that went out of style with the likes of U2 and perhaps Coldplay, but if it's done right, is so affecting, and it pulls you so much closer to this band. So that's what's really pulled me into wanting to do this listing. I remember listening to Arcade Fire's Funeral When it came out, for an entire weekend, walking around with it on my headphones, just lost in it. It was such an emotionally overwhelming experience, and the music was so incredible. Now, I'm going to start my album reviews with a score that I rarely have ever given out in movies, and gave for the first time after many years to Nomadland last year. For a first release film, I would have given it to older films that I reviewed retrospectively, but I'd never got to the end of a film and thought so highly of it on new release. And that's pretty much the same here. There's, for one thing, on an ordinary level, the songs are brilliant. There are a lot of songs on here that really, really stand out, and on that basis it would be a very strong album, but it is one of the most beautifully curated albums I've ever heard. Each song seems to bolster the one that preceded it and slide into the one that follows it. The band have talked about the fact that they did make a conscious effort. It's almost like indie rock classical music. It is a suite of songs that is everything in its right place. The opening, Chaos Space Marine, has a wonderfully unusual selection of instrumentation. It's like Baroque chamber pop. They don't rely on volume of guitars here at all. There are lots of stuff like violins and horns that play on this record. In that manner, it is a very post-Arcade Fire funeral album. A lot of people playing often acoustic instruments, but nonetheless building up a head of steam. Chaos Space Marine is just an incredible thing with this. They build up to these thrilling, high-tempo, cathartic releases on a lot of the songs on here. It sort of seeds into the heart of the record, which is these really long-form, very gentle songs, Concord and Bread Song, that build up momentum after about 4 minutes of languorous drifting along beautifully at times. There's a lot of pop on this album. You wouldn't say that anything was a pop song, but when they rise up to the bridges and the choruses, there's lots that you would consider that is pop music on here. And I think both those songs do that. They have several minutes of contemplative, very sort of quiet music that builds. It's a very post-rock album. Particularly, I found another reference point, F sharp, A sharp, Infinity from Godspeed You Black Emperor. If you imagine that record having a singer, I think you would be quite a long way to understanding what this album's like. I don't know other bands that are making songs like Concord or Bread Song. And after that sort of period of the album, in the midsection, there's some more up-tempo stuff like Good Will Hunting and Haldern. They drop back down for an instrumental, which isn't particularly long, but is lovely. And then we get three very long-form epics that are around the 9 minutes. One's 7 minutes, one's 9 minutes, and one's nearly 13 minutes. That end the album and occupy half of it. Which are probably the best songs on there, although Chaos Space Marine might... one other thing, why I've given this album the score, when you're inside songs like Concord or Bread Song or Chaos Space Marine, you think it's the album's best song. And I did over and over. It rarely ever pulls. The final three songs are incredibly substantial. The place where he inserted the blade is curiously one of the happier sounding. This is definitely bleak music, but often very funny. He's a funny lyricist. He's got a great turn of phrase. In that way, he's sort of almost at times between Morrissey and Ian Curtis, but he's quite oblique as well. So some of it's very direct, even mentioning people's names. Other times it's a lot more enigmatic. Particularly on Snow Globes, that was the track I heard first, and that was the one that pulled me into this. I thought it was incredible. I think it's a stunning piece of music. I saw it builds on this very Godspeed You Black Emperor post-rock guitar motif over many minutes until it gradually builds into this cacophony with an incredible chorus that I couldn't get out of my head for so long. The Gods of Weather bit about Henry knows snow globes don't shake on their own, which is repeated as a mantra through the midsection. I thought it just stayed with me for days. I just couldn't get it out of my head. I saw the Needle Drop guy say that was a 1 week passage on the album because they used this free jazz drumming over the top. I actually really like that choice. He singled it out as the one bad musical choice they made in an album that is consistently inventive when it comes to arrangements, because they overlay these free jazz drums all the way out top over that chorus through the midsection. But I really thought it aided the restlessness of that song. And I thought that was the emotive heart of the album. I really thought that gave it, and a thundering climax, and then it sort of drifts off again. And Basketball Shoes, the longest track on the album, is a summation of the whole album. It repeats motifs from the other songs on the album, which is an incredible way to show how coherent a whole the album is. That peppered throughout this song, which could realistically be 3 songs. They could easily have put gaps in between the passages and called them separate songs. But it seems to be a micro version of the album, which is a terrific way to end. And another post-rock classic towards the end of that track I was noting was Mogwai's Young Team, their debut album. And it's probably it gets to the loudest point on the whole album. As a whole, this is, for me, up there with the pinnacles of indie rock this century, which includes stuff like Yankee Hotel Foxtrot by Wilco, Source Tag and Codes, You Forget It in People by Broken Social Scene. But I won't know how I really feel about this for a while, but at the moment, it is feeling to me almost the equal of my 2 favourite indie albums of the century, which is Modest Mouse's The Moon and Antarctica and the Arcade Fire's Funeral. And as such, I would say that Black Country New Road, am I saying the band name right? Black Country New Road's second album, Ants From Up There, I'm going to start my album reviews with a perfect 10 out of 10.